All right, we are here on Disrupt Education, the podcast. Alli, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Peter. I'm back from New York, when at the time of this recording,
Yeah,
in this short interlude before I jump to Arizona. So, just always traveling. It's always an adventure here at the Disrupt Education podcast. You're
yeah,
still in Chicago.
yeah. I'm still here in Chicago. So how about that? Yeah, it's crazy because I think when listeners can't they obviously don't see the space between the podcasts that we do, but we're just like doing a bunch of stuff all over the place. So
Yeah.
um,
Oh, yeah. I mean, I just got back teaching a college course in upstate New York, which was really exciting. And I think it's going to lend itself well to those. And it was a first year course, right?
yeah.
So kind of students who are just kind of getting into college. I think it will be of good insight in the next couple episodes here with our guest.
Yeah, and I mean, it's so great to have our guest here. So I'm not even going to introduce him yet because I want to go into a LinkedIn post that I put out there, I don't know, a few weeks back. And this was a quote somewhere. I don't know where I got this quote. Maybe I came up with it. I don't know. So if this is your quote, I apologize. It's yours. But the quote is college-driven high school curriculum is becoming a dinosaur. Do you agree with this quote? And yes, no, it's complicated. I'll comment. So yeah, I got a majority of yeses, some nos, and then some people who made me think. Well, the individual coming up made me think. I'm going to read his response because I think it's a wonderfully written response that stirred my emotions. I don't get stirred too much, but I got stirred. So it was, here it is. I don't believe it is the responsibility of educators at compulsory public schools to prepare students to be work ready, in quotes. And I think the push for students to go to higher ed should be maintained, but also explained. We shouldn't tell students to go to higher ed just because that's what they're supposed to do. And supposed is in all caps. I love that. We should teach them the value of a multidisciplinary and complex post-secondary experience while also informing them of the drawbacks. It isn't a teacher's job to stop a student from pursuing knowledge and turn their sights on a trade or career. That is something that students should be informed of, but a decision they should make independently. Schools should not stop pushing any, in all caps, particular path and start preaching the value of the education they are already receiving in a public institution. It's not the job of an educator or any of us to decide what type of education is best, just that learning is an amazing thing. Now, if people have heard our previous podcast and they've taken notes, they probably pick out who this person is. That is Caden Ketchman. Caden, thank you, number one, for being here. And number two, for making me think. You rattled me.
First, thank you for having me here again.
So if you don't mind giving a reintroduction, you're a student at Cumberland Polytechnic, and about in your last semester, correct?
Yeah, I'm in my last semester of high school, just about done, finally.
And I think all of this conversation was right around the time that you were doing a ton or preparing for a ton of college applications. Am I
Yeah,
in there?
applying to 14 schools, which was around 44 essays for those who have not gone through the process in a minute. It was a pretty exhausting time, but it also gave me a chance to really appreciate the feeling of being a student more than the feeling of being a college applicant.
So thinking about that quote, what I'm kind of curious, what you're so reflective. I mean, I still remember you were all like, in my mind, you're like the romanticizer of learning. And that was what we kind of uncovered in your last episode. So it's cool that you still kind of have that. But in that comment that you made on Peter's post, you mentioned this idea of like what students are supposed to do. So have you felt that a lot? Like this battle between what you're quote unquote supposed to do versus the path that you want to do, is, or your peers? Maybe you've dissected that out, but you know, you probably have heard of conversations. So yeah, I'd love to know a little bit more about where your thoughts are.
Of course, both my parents have doctorate degrees in psychology. So higher education has been like extremely like a major part of my life for all of it. Like there was always an expectation that I will go to college, of course, but then even beyond that, there was an expectation that I will go to grad school, because it's, you know, there's of course that expectation for the child to do better than the parents did for themselves. And so it's always been like a pressure, but never necessarily a pressure that I didn't appreciate. Like I appreciated that my parents had the expectations and the know-how to get to an amazing place because they had already done it before. So when it comes to like what I was supposed to do, I always just kind of knew I was supposed to continue my education after high school, and even after undergrad. That being said, throughout my high school experience, it's everything in comparison to what a college-ready student looks like. Every single test that you take, there is a margin of what is considered a college-ready student. And it's laid out for you. It's not like hidden in the numbers. They tell you exactly what a college-ready student looks like. And so that is very much a piece of what students are supposed to do. But I also go to a specialized high school, which means that half of the kids here are preparing for higher education by getting ahead on college classes, while the other half is actually going into trades. So it was very much a present piece of my education, the option of going into trades, but it was never one that I really saw for myself. And it's also not really one that is pushed on you if you're not already looking into it, which sort of influenced the way that I decided to respond to that post. Because I don't see it being the job of an educator, especially a humanities educator, to push students into a trade. It's their job to ask them to continue their education beyond high school, what is compulsory.
That's where I was like spinning. I read, and Kate and I already had this conversation, which for love of God, everybody out there, just have conversations if you don't agree. Like, I think that's my one tip of the day for people who, you know, are disagreeing. But now after I've read it and I understood where, you know, Caden is coming from, and seeing that, and we're going to dive into 44 essays. Is it 44?
I did do 44 essays.
Okay, so we're going to dive into that, but and then we'll move forward onto this actually in part 2. This is a two-part series, so we're going to leave people hanging at the end a little bit on this one. But you know, it was like I think I'm so like loving of the work ready skills student that I was unwilling to give up the experience of education and then the extension of education. I'm a stubborn dude. I don't know if you know that. I think you know that, Alli. Caden. So I was unwilling actually to, at the time I read it, I was just like, wait, it's ruining things. And then again, Caden, you went right back to the romanticizing of education. And at the end, I had to read it like 3 times. And I'm not kidding, Alli. I had to like sleep on this, which is a great thing that a mentor told me one time, sleep on it. And then I started to get it. I'm like, oh, okay. So yes, it's more like fall in love with the problem, not the solution. So, which I really appreciated. And it is amazing, Caden. I mean, as somebody your age thinking this deeply, man, I wish, you know, well, I guess I think that's where we want people to go. But let's go back into then, you know, writing and reflecting about your own experiences in your own mind. You've had 44, I'm sure there were some, you know, throwaways in that. And we had a conversation talking about writing effectively and what does that mean, and about your own experiences and really understanding your own mind. What does that mean to you? What does it mean to write effectively and really understand your own experiences in your mind?
To me, writing effectively it is entirely synonymous with writing, like reflecting on your experiences in a way that is productive. So when we're taught to write or in all of your education, you will never be taught how to write reflectively. And the reason for that is because academic writing is always based on what other people think, which is entirely useful when you are going into research or when you are writing about literature. But if you consider for a moment how you would describe yourself if someone asked you, describe Peter, describe Alli, how would you do that? It's a skill that most people are never exposed to or taught how to achieve. And it is one that is entirely required in all 44 of those essays. 44 is, of course, not including the major Common App essay that everyone has to write, which is even more intense and reflective. But you have to be able to describe yourself in a very limited number of words, which, I mean, of course, that's just college applications, but it's a little bit more profound than that, because you can't just describe what happened. It's up to you to really consider where those experiences went in your mind. What did they do? Like, everything has a purpose. Otherwise, why are you writing about it? And so to me, writing reflectively is legitimately a psychological experience. It's one in which you have to actually kind of give yourself a sort of therapy. Go back into these experiences and really understand what they did to change you into the person that you are today. And that is something that it makes writing reflectively so incredibly difficult, and something that makes it so difficult to teach, which I think has a lot to do with why it's just not taught in general, even though it's a skill that I believe can impact more than just your college essays, but also your actual mental health, the way that you view yourself.
What was something, I mean, that you discovered about yourself through these essays?
Well, I actually did a lot of reflecting on my family situation, which I have a pretty like regular family, aside from, a couple things, but it really gave me the opportunity to consider how different individuals in my family really impacted the person that I became. I ended up writing one of my favorite essays that I wrote for multiple college essays was about my dad, having conversations with my dad about psychology. And there was a time in my life when I didn't fully understand the person that my father was, because we just grew up in such different households and also just different times. His father was very, very, very different than he has been for me. And so trying to understand some of the traditional aspects of my father's like belief system had been a bit of a challenge for me growing up, but it was one that never really became an issue until I got older. And I find that a lot of people at my age have a tendency to fall away from their relationships with their parents and then eventually kind of come back like 10 years later, and then, you're best friends with your parents, or maybe not. But by writing reflectively, considering what I knew about my father, considering what I knew about his upbringing, considering the way that the conversations I had with him really spoke to the person that he was, I was way better able to understand why he held the beliefs that I maybe couldn't otherwise have made make sense. And so not only did this make for a great college essay, but it also really genuinely improved the relationship I have with my father. We ended up talking about it quite a lot, and I was able to put to rest a lot of the like little issues that would have otherwise kept us from being like very close.
When you talk about reflecting and really understanding who you are at any certain time, especially at the age that you are, and the thought process there is absolutely beautiful. I mean, like I'm soaking in that entire story, not even reading everything that you put into that. I mean, it makes you a better human being, and I think man, I wish that, and I'm not like I'm romanticizing myself back at age 17. I wish I could have thought that way, and possibly if somebody guided me through that reflecting in my own writing, it would have been way more freeing for myself, like understanding who I am. Outside of it's difficult to do. Why else? Where would this be implemented in education? Where where you would put it in? It was on an application, right? And it just kind of, you just started reflecting, but where would you put this in an education in a public school?
So personally, I actually started this experience of reflecting on my family life on my own time during my junior year, long before application cycle, which made it a little bit easier to write these essays. But I can 100% see an application within education itself. For example, I don't know if you've ever read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, which is a philosophical text where he's literally just meditating and reflecting on the lessons that he's learned throughout his life, because he had kind of an extreme life that started out really peaceful and ended up really crazy. And so as you're reading through it, it's just all of these ideas that he's putting into onto paper throughout his life. It's not written in any particularly beautiful form. It's not poetic. It's literally a list. And so when you are reading some kind of philosophic text, which hopefully some people have access to during their high school years, you will start to see that this reflective writing is extremely common, specifically in philosophy. And to better understand it, you have to be able to put yourself in that position. So to write reflectively is legitimately to be a philosopher, which is something that we are intending to teach. We are trying to teach critical thinking. We are trying to teach these ideas of like nuance and interdisciplinary thought. And all of that requires reflection. But actual reflective writing itself is something that we do experience. We just don't recognize it and we don't teach it because it's sort of a concept that is considered social. It's not one that feels very academic because you're not writing about something that you learned, you're writing about something that you experienced. But it's sort of thought that like you can't really test reflective writing very well, because how are you going to tell someone that the way that they are writing about their experience is wrong? Which is very much why I think that it is not something that is taught. But within academia is extremely important. And as you enter higher education, I mean, I'm taking college classes. I can't say I'm not at a university yet, so I can't speak to it perfectly, but I can say that already in ethics and philosophy courses, reflectiveness is something that is very much valued. When your professor can see that you are able to actively reflect on your own experiences in comparison to philosophic texts, that is the best thing that you can do, because that's the whole point of philosophy, making sure that you're able to think.
It's really interesting, this conversation and the timing of this podcast, because this idea of thinking about your thinking and reflective writing was a huge part of a science course that I just taught. And most people wouldn't think that, like, oh, a science class, you're reflecting on your experiences and how you bring what you've learned into the course. But it was a totally different way to teach a science course than I have previously done. And so I can speak to the fact that I think more colleges are doing that, at least in my experience, and then what you're experiencing with your college courses. So my brain went to, I remember taking a psychology class in high school, and that would have been a perfect location for teaching this, because you're already trying to, rather than just learn like brain functions or, Pavlov's dogs, or right, like the different theories about psychology, is this kind of metacognition and thinking about how your experiences connect with the learning is such an important part of the learning process. And it helps you kind of spider web your learning. And so what I'm interested in, Caden, with this psychological experience you just went through, perhaps from just sheer volume, right? Because you were doing 44 essays. In that experience, right? Like you shared this beautiful story of like one of the big takeaways, but was there a point in just the amount of essays that you had like this kind of epiphany of how kind of like what that process drew out of you in terms of being able to see the value add of reflective writing? Like it was almost like you went through a course, self-taught, of reflective writing, but I'm really interested in like what else you kind of pulled out from that, and or if you could then see how it like maybe was in other areas, but now you kind of succinctly or more succinctly saw all of your ability to reflectively write because of all these college essays.
The college essays, I can't really say that they allowed me to recognize more reflective thought in other subjects, partly because I think that it needs to be more present. I think that part of what writing the college essays taught me is that I wasn't taught this. Like, like it was something that was entirely new to me. I think that there are definitely things that like things in education that do require a little bit of reflective thought that maybe we don't realize. Like for example, when I was a TA for an English like a freshman year English class, and one of the first assignments was that students had to create a presentation about their family, but instead of creating a presentation about their family, they had to create one about the values of the family. What is something that is more metaphysical than literal about their family? So like some people watch movies with their family, but that's not good enough because is that a value? Are you guys religious toward the movies, or is there something more metaphysical going on about the way that you're spending time together? And those types of projects do legitimately require reflectiveness, but it's not really taught that this is something that is going to be important. The way that they're teaching it is, great, now you know how to think reflectively. Now think reflectively from the mind of a character in a book, which is great. That's a great way for you to slowly enter like reflectiveness. But it's not ever going to teach you that you need to really be doing that for yourself. We're constantly thinking for other people. We're thinking for that philosopher that wrote whatever text. We're thinking for the character in this book and what might they have been going through at this, but we're never ever really considering, what am I going through right now? And what does it have to do with the situation that I've been put in? And then one day we wake up and there's 44 college essays due, and we have to write about ourselves, and it's not something we're comfortable with doing. So I absolutely do see it in the subjects that I've been exposed to, but I've never seen it in a way that is explicit enough, which is what I hope to see in the future.
If I had to ask Caden one question, and I walked past, we're at a dinner party, and I'm like, Caden, tell me about yourself. Don't answer that yet, because that's what we're going to go into on part 2 of this series. Because what we're going to do next week in this series is we're going to go checking the boxes of college and why you shouldn't just do that, and going deeper into who they really are, because I think this leads into that. So Alli, final thoughts on writing effectively.
Caden, you said a lot of wonderful things. I really liked that last part of how do you go from thinking for someone or something or a text or whatnot to versus what am I thinking or what am I going through, and how does that relate to what I'm learning? And what I love about you, Caden, and what all the listeners are going to carry in this episode and the next one, is how you are able to take your experiences and see how they would fit back into previous experiences. And that's just like a skill that most people don't have. And it allows you to see like where this idea of reflective writing can be placed in other areas. And so I'm excited to see your thoughts on where it can go moving forward as well in our next episode.
And he will answer, who is he? Right after we get done with this one. We'll catch you guys next time. Just stay tuned because part 2 will be coming up in the next episode. Thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode of the Disrupt Education Podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Are you ready to disrupt the educational arena you're a part of? For more ways to get involved in the work we do here at Disrupt Education, check us out at disrupteducation.co. or find us on LinkedIn at Peter Hostrawser or Alli Privitt.
Our mission here is to help facilitate and amplify changes in the educational system through local initiatives and help you scale them into community movements. Our building network of disruptors in education are working to move beyond scores and grades as the only measure for student learning. If your school district, college, campus, or organization is looking for facilitators of this work, reach out on our website or social media.
And if you have any thoughts or feedback on this week's episode or any episode, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries, taking risks, and most importantly, disrupting education.